The dusty main street of Dry Creek was nearly empty, save for a few men leaning on porch rails and a tumbleweed rolling lazily across the road. The late afternoon sun burned hot and low, painting the sky with streaks of copper and crimson. Clara stood outside the town hall, clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, waiting for someone, anyone, to step forward and claim her name off the paper nailed to the wall. She was the last bride left. All the other women had been chosen, some reluctantly, some eagerly, but Clara had watched each one go until the crowd thinned, and silence settled over the town. The men who had come for wives had glanced at her, whispered among themselves, and turned away. They knew she had no dowry, no rich family, no powerful connections. She was just Clara Dawson, the orphan girl who scrubbed floors at the general store and slept in the attic over the feed supply. Now the paper with her name was fluttering in the breeze, a stark reminder that no one wanted her. "Sorry, Clara," the town clerk said, pulling his hat low. "Looks like today ain't your day." She nodded stiffly, fighting to keep her chin from trembling. The clerk had just turned to take down the paper when a sound cut through the heavy air, a chair scraping across the wooden floorboards inside the hall. Clara turned, heart hammering. From the shadows at the back of the room, a man rose to his full height. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a worn hat pulled low over his eyes. His coat was dusty from the trail, his boots scuffed, and his jaws shadowed with days of stubble. "I'll take her," he said, his voice rough like gravel after a storm. The room went still. "Luke Callahan?" one man whispered to another. "Didn't think we'd ever see him in town again." Luke stepped forward, his spurs clicking softly against the wooden floor. He didn't look at anyone but Clara. "I'll take her," he repeated. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "Well, she's yours then," Clara's breath caught. This was the man people called a ghost. He hadn't been to town in months, not since the tragedy last winter that left him alone on his ranch. But now, for reasons Clara couldn't guess, he had stepped forward for her. They left town as the sky deepened into purple. Luke's horse was a massive black gelding with a calm, steady gait. Clara rode behind him, holding on to the worn leather of the saddle as the town shrank in the distance. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the saddle, the thud of hooves, and the faint call of a coyote somewhere far off. Finally, Clara gathered her courage. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Luke didn't look back. "Didn't seem right leaving you standing there." "Still," she said, "you don't even know me." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Don't need to. You looked like you had nowhere to go." "I know what that feels like." Clara's chest ached. She knew about his loss, everyone did. His wife and little boy had died last winter when outlaws raided the ranch. Since then, Luke had lived alone, letting the land and fences fall into disrepair, speaking to no one. And yet he had chosen her. They made camp under the open sky, the fire casting a warm circle of light. Luke cooked beans in a blackened pot, and Clara sat wrapped in her shawl, staring into the flames. "You're quiet," she said softly. Luke stirred the pot without looking up. "Ain't much to say. You didn't come to town for a wife, did you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, came for supplies. Saw you standing there. Looked like the loneliest soul in the world." Clara blinked back tears. "I felt like it." Luke finally looked at her, his blue eyes catching the firelight. "You ain't alone now?" That's something. Something unspoken passed between them. Clara realized this man, as broken as he was, had offered her more kindness in one day than she'd known in years. The next day they reached the edge of Luke's land. Fences were down, the barn roof sagged, and weeds grew high around the corral. "This is it," Luke said simply. Clara looked around. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever had. As they worked through the day repairing the fence, Clara began to notice Luke's guarded glances. He flinched at sudden noises, his hand never far from the gun at his hip. That night, while they ate by the fire, he finally told her why. "They might come back," he said quietly. "The men who took everything from me. I've been waiting for 'em." Clara's heart thudded. "And if they do?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Then I'll finish it." It happened 2 nights later. Hoofbeats thundered in the dark, and Luke was on his feet in an instant. "Get inside," he shouted. Clara ran for the cabin as shots rang out. The night lit up with muzzle flashes, horses screaming, men shouting. Luke returned fire, every shot precise, every movement controlled. Clara crouched by the window, heart in her throat. When the gunfire stopped, silence settled heavy over the ranch. Luke stepped inside, breathing hard. His shirt was torn, but he was alive. "They're gone," he said. Clara rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought," he caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. "You're safe now. That's what matters." In the days that followed, Clara helped Luke mend the fences in the house. She made the cabin feel like a home again. Curtains on the windows, flowers on the table. Luke began to talk more, telling her about the ranch as it once was, about the son he had lost. And Clara shared her own story, the long, lonely years of being passed from family to family, never belonging anywhere. "You belong here now," Luke said one evening as they stood by the corral, watching the sun sink low. Clara felt her chest tighten. "Do you mean that?" He turned to her, the last light catching his face. "I wouldn't have come to town if I didn't." Weeks later, the ranch looked alive again. Fences strong, barn repaired, the corral full of horses. Clara stood on the porch, the wind tugging at her hair, watching Luke ride in from the pasture. He dismounted, walked up the steps, and took her hands in his calloused ones. "You saved this place," he said quietly. "And you saved me." Clara smiled through tears. "Maybe we saved each other." Luke's expression softened, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled, really smiled. The sun rose behind them, spilling gold across the ranch. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. One night, a storm rolled in from the west. Thunder rattled the windows and rain pounded on the roof. Clara and Luke worked together to bring the horses into the barn, both soaked through by the time they finished. When they finally made it inside, Luke lit a lantern and hung up his wet coat. Clara's dress clung to her hair plastered to her face. She shivered by the fire. Luke crossed the room, hesitated, then draped a blanket over her shoulders. "Clara," he said softly. She looked up, startled by the sound of her name on his lips. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone," he admitted, "but I can't imagine this place without you now. You've brought life back here. Back to me." Clara's breath caught. She had felt it too, the slow, steady warmth growing between them since that first night by the fire. "I was so scared you only chose me out of pity," she whispered. Luke shook his head. "No, I chose you because I saw someone strong enough to stand beside me. And I was right." For the first time, Clara leaned into his chest, letting herself cry. Luke held her, not with desperation, but with quiet strength. By spring, the ranch was thriving. New calves dotted the fields, and the air was filled with the smell of wildflowers. One morning, Luke saddled 2 horses and waited for Clara by the corral. "Thought we'd ride into town," he said when she appeared. "For supplies?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "For a preacher." Clara's heart skipped. They rode side by side into town, the wind tugging at her hair, the sun warm on her face. People watched them as they passed, whispering, smiling. The lonely cowboy and the last bride, no longer strangers, no longer broken. When they stopped in front of the church, Luke dismounted and held out his hand. "You ready?" he asked. Clara nodded, her eyes bright. "I've been ready since the day you raised your hand." Hand in hand, they walked through the church doors, leaving the dust and the past behind.